Okay, the sixth key concept is Adler's theory of personality. And we're getting toward that idea of lifestyle now. Um, and lifestyle and personality are, as I said, very much influenced by early experiences. Interpretation of early childhood experiences have a large impact on our future or later personality. But it's important to remember we talked about the idea that soft determinism. The childhood does not determine us, it affects us, but it's a soft determinism. Adler said the most important question is not where you come from, but where are you going? How do you interpret the events of your life, and where does that interpretation take you? So the concept of lifestyle, and you can think of this, as I said, as personality. I like to think of it as the way that we individually answer these questions. It's our ideas about who we are as a person, who am I, who I could be and should be, what is my ideal self, what is that person I'm working toward, what is our view of the world and our place in it, and what are our ideas, our ethical convictions, and ideas about right and wrong. You can break this down into the way the person answers three questions. I am, the world is, and therefore. The way I see myself, the way I see the world, and how I behave as a result. The influence of childhood on the development of lifestyle, as I said, very important idea. Lifestyle originally develops. We start answering these questions when we are very young, and Adler talked about the first 5 or 6 years of life being very important in the development of the lifestyle. So what happened in the first 5 or 6 years? It's the time that we are primarily usually with our family, with our caregivers. We are learning about ourselves, we are learning about the world and ourselves in the world in the context of these early relationships. So how were these relationships? How do we come to know ourselves? How do we come to answer that question of who am I? And primarily when we are children, we answer that by the responses of those adults and others around us. So if we are lucky enough to have parents who love us, who encourage us, who believe that we are capable and special and unique and all those sorts of things, then we tend to feel more highly of ourselves. We tend to see the world as an encouraging place, maybe as a safe place, and we tend to have a pretty optimistic view of ourselves and the world. If, on the other hand, we are a child who felt not wanted, who was abused, who was put down, those sorts of negative experiences, then the likely response would be that I am less worthy, I'm not a good person, and the world is a dangerous and difficult place, and I'm going to respond to the world accordingly. Okay, so we make a lot of important decisions about our lives and where we're going to go and what we want to do early in life. Problem is, this is not really the best time in life to make important decisions about our lives. All right, when we are 5 and 6, we don't really have a realistic view of the world. That's why we don't let 5 and 6-year-olds run for president. Okay, we don't let them run for Congress. We don't let them make important decisions. We let them decide what they want for lunch, but we don't let them decide how we're going to spend our time, because they don't really have the best understanding of the world and how it works. For people who are older, like most of the population. So the point is, when we're 5 and 6 is not the best time to make those decisions, but it is the time that we make those decisions. All right? And remember, we talked about this idea of consistency and unity of personality. We tend to keep doing what we're doing until something significant or important happens that makes us change it. So we are frequently in a situation where we make faulty assumptions about ourselves and the world, and they lead us into trouble. And Adler referred to these ideas as basic mistakes, and we can make basic mistakes in a few areas. We can have distorted attitudes about ourselves. We can have ideas like, I am less capable than others. And the response that we have to that is, if I feel I'm less capable, then my behavior will be that I don't take responsibility. I'll let other people take responsibility for me. I don't make my own decisions, for example. So we can have all sorts of distorted attitudes about ourselves. That's one example. We can have distorted attitudes about the world, the other people in it. We can feel that other people cannot be trusted. The world is a dangerous place. Maybe it is for this person. Whether it is or not, if they feel that way, they're going to respond by not trusting, not confiding, not sharing with people, and as a result, the relationships are going to reflect that. You probably won't be getting involved in significant relationships where they feel they can trust and share with people. We can have distorted goals about where we're heading. I must be perfect. And if you believe that you must be perfect and that your goal is to be perfect, then what do? You do things where you can be perfect, and you don't take chances because you don't want to fail. Remember, the chief danger in life, according to Adler, is that you take too many precautions. You don't learn to swim if you don't get in the water. Distorted conclusions are the overgeneralizations that you hear people say things like, I'll never get what I want. Never. I will always fail. So these sort of overgeneralizations. It will always be this way. It will never be this way. I will never be happy. I'll never get what I want. Again, all these distortions that get us into trouble in life and are quite difficult to change, and that arise from our experiences in the world and the way that we have developed our lifestyle. One way that lifestyle can be seen and understood is looking at the way that the person engages in the life tasks, and Adler identified 3 life tasks: friendship and social relationships, love and intimate relationships, and work. And you can look at people and the relationships in these areas and get a sense of lifestyle, how this person sees themselves in the world. After Adler, later theoreticians in the Adlerian perspective added self-concept and spirituality as life tasks, things that we must achieve in order to survive. We need to be able to develop friendships and social relationships. We need to develop love and have intimate relationships. We need to work and participate and contribute to society. Hopefully we have a positive self-concept, and a lot of people develop a spirituality and a comfort with themselves in the world in the context of religion and spirituality. We'll come back to that idea of life tasks in a little bit. As I said, a lot of these ideas transfer to a lot of other theories, but one unique to the Adlerian perspective is the way that in Adlerian counseling and therapy proper, you will frequently see the lifestyle assessment used. So early in the counseling relationship, the therapist or counselor will do an assessment, and there are a number of ways that you can do this, but it usually involves, first of all, an assessment of the family constellation, how people are arranged in the family, and look at the early memories. Family being the first social situation in which we experience the world, our place in the family is very important. And we'll talk about birth order, and we'll talk about the other element, the early recollections. Birth order is the idea that the order in which you were born affects the way that you see yourself in the world. And a lot of interesting research in this area, quite a bit supportive. So some recent research suggesting that there's a lot to this idea. They looked at personalities and order in which they were born, and a lot of research over the last century in this area. Not all of it supportive, but for the most part it has been. And so it makes sense to me, and over my years of teaching I've found it makes sense to a lot of the students. The idea is that there are certain characteristics that you tend to find in, for example, the oldest child. What are the characteristics of the oldest child in the family? They tend to be, for example, described as responsible. They tend to be, what? I'll let you do the reading and I'll let you do some thinking. But the one that stands out is they tend to take responsibility. They frequently will get along well with adults. They tend to take care of the younger children, things like that. The second child, and sometimes the middle child, what the interesting thing there is that, remember, the idea is that people strive for significance. They try to find their own way in the world, their unique way of being significant. And what you tend to see in the second child is that they find a way to be important that is very different from the way the first child went. So they come into the world and there's already a child there who is receiving attention for being a good student. Then frequently the second child will become an athlete and will receive attention that way, for example. But basically the second child tends to find their own ways, their unique ways of being themselves in the world and finding significance. Middle children, when the second child becomes the middle child, there are a whole lot of characteristics associated with middle children. They tend to be, for example, described as peacemakers. They tend to feel like they are in between and often play that role of peacemaker and bringing the older and the younger together. Youngest children tend to be thought of as they're the baby of the family. A lot of times they're seen as the less mature, more energetic. Again, all sorts of characteristics associated with youngest children. Only children also have their own set of characteristics attributed to them. Again, tend to get along well with adults, tend to get their way because they are the only child. They don't have to learn to share. They become accustomed to that, things like that. So there are all sorts of characteristics that have been described in terms of birth order and how it affects your development of your lifestyle. And this would be assessed with often with a questionnaire or an interview where the therapist or counselor would ask questions about relationships of the child and other siblings with the parents. How is your relationship with your father and with your mother and so on, and the other siblings? What were the expectations about you and the family? What did people expect of you? How did you see yourself? Did you see yourself the way that others saw you, or did you sense that others saw you in a way that you didn't really feel was yourself? What sort of behavior was encouraged? Were you encouraged to be quiet, loud, athletic, happy, and so on? What was discouraged? How did you seek significance? How did you find your own significance? Were you the clown? Were you the troublemaker? Were you the responsible one? What was the role that you developed for yourself as you interpreted the world and your role in the family? The other side of this, the other element of the lifestyle assessment is the early memories assessment. Why are early memories important? What do they tell us? I want you to think for a second about a couple of your own early memories. What are some of the first things you remember in your life? And as you're thinking, let's think about why these matter. Basically, the idea here is that every day, every second of every day is a potential memory. In our whole lives, we could remember millions and millions of experiences, but we tend to focus on and remember more clearly just a few, right? And you were probably able just now to recall a couple of early memories, and they are memories that you have gone back to and held on to for some reason. And the point is, out of all these memories that you could have chosen to remember, you remembered these ones because they are consistent with, they tell you something about your view of yourself in the world. If you remember yourself being confined in a crib for long periods of time, then that probably tells us something about how you saw yourself in the world. If you remember a tender moment with one of your parents, a bright sunny day, some sort of positive memory like that, that tells you something about your view of yourself in the world. So memories that we choose to remember, out of all the possible memories that we could remember, are the memories that confirm our expectations and beliefs about the world. And that's why the idea of early memories, what do you remember, can be so telling and important. So those are the formal aspects, some of the formal aspects of assessing lifestyle. But do you have to do a lifestyle assessment? Not necessarily. There are other ways of learning about a person's lifestyle. Just observing the person, asking questions and getting to know the person will tell you a lot about their lifestyle. I talked about the life tasks, and one idea that I've talked about is asking questions in the form of a life task interview. So take relationships, social relationships. You can ask questions about the person's social relationships. You can ask them about work. You can ask them about their intimate relationships, their love relationships. Do they have them? Are they satisfied with them? And do an interview of that sort, and you can get a good sense of lifestyle. You can also ask some famous Adlerian questions that the responses can be very helpful. Things like, what is it that you avoid at all costs? And the response to that can be very informative about the person and their lifestyle. What feelings do you think you provoke in others? And then the question, famous Adlerian question, is, what would be different if this problem did not exist? If I had this magic wand, or we had this time machine and we could go back and undo it or get rid of this problem, then how would your life be different? Again, the response can be very informative, very helpful in understanding where the person wants to go, how they see the issue, the disability, the limitation, affecting the way they would like things to be. You get a lot of good information from these questions. I talked about this life task analysis. You can go through the life tasks and ask questions like, how satisfied are you? What is typical in this area? Do you usually have a lot of relationships or just a few close relationships? How do you feel about that? Is that the way you want things to be? You can ask all sorts of questions about the life tasks and get a good sense of lifestyle that way. So let's talk about the process of Adlerian theory. We've gone through the key ideas, the key concepts. Now we're moving into the process of therapy. How does it work? What does it look like? Basically, it's a 4-step process. Establishing a relationship with some specific characteristics that we'll talk about. Uncovering the dynamics of the client by doing a lifestyle assessment. Interpreting and hopefully having the interpretation process result in insights, new ideas for the person. They become aware of things that they are thinking and doing. They develop insight, and then the 4th stage is reorientation or change. I'll focus for a second on this idea of the relationship. Very important that you develop a relationship with, as I said, a number of characteristics. One that is based on respect, trust, genuineness, and empathy. Because the point is, in order to be successful in helping people to change, you are going to be acting as a mirror, acting as an interpreter, telling this person things about themselves. And in order for us to accept and listen to things that people tell us about ourselves, we tend to listen more to people who we respect and trust. So the relationship is really very important in this theory. The relationship in the Adlerian model is defined as a friendly one between equals. Okay, not the very different from the psychoanalytic perspective, where the therapist is basically a blank screen. This is a very personable approach, just like Adler was himself a very personable, social sort of extrovert. But the idea here is 2 people working together as equals, cooperating to help one achieve his or her goals. We want to help the client to understand some things, specifically, first of all, that we are responsible, that we play a role in our developing of our problems, and so we have to take responsibility for acting to change our problems. Problems are based on faulty perceptions and faulty learning, and these are things that can be changed. And the third is that the client can and will have to take responsibility for change. Okay, nobody else is going to change the person, but the client is going to take responsibility for their own life. This process of Adlerian therapy requires a lot of attention. In order to understand the person at the level that we need to understand the lifestyle, requires a lot of observation. We observe postures, attitudes, movements, expressions, mannerisms, things that they say, their habits, their ambitions. All of these things are clues to their lifestyle, their interpretation of the meaning of life. The second element in the process is the lifestyle assessment. We've talked about the formal and informal approaches to assessing lifestyle through interview, through questions, and sometimes through worksheets. Third step is then interpretation. So once the counselor has developed a sense of the client's lifestyle, then we begin a process of interpretation. And the key idea here is that we do not tell the people, we don't tell the client, this is what you're doing, but with an attitude of respect and exploration, we begin to make interpretations, conclusions, and statements. We begin to reflect what we're seeing, but we do it with an attitude of respect and exploration. We make observations, we suggest things, but the important thing here is that we allow the client to tell us if we're wrong. If we make a statement of interpretation about the client and the client does not agree, then they may want to modify it, they may want to correct it. So I don't always get angry when this happens. I get angry quite a bit, but only when this other thing also happens. So you can work it out. You can modify your interpretations, rather than the sort of, again, medical model approach of this is what is wrong and this is how you need to fix it. But it is a process of interpreting for the client what you're seeing and how the way that they are choosing to behave is causing their present situation. And then the last step is, if that insight is developed, working with the client to act in new ways, to construct a new way of seeing the world and a new way of behaving in it. A lot of interesting techniques come out of the Adlerian perspective. Encouragement is key, focusing on the individual's ability to change, their ability to take responsibility, to make choices, and encouraging them in that process. Encouraging them for effort, even unsuccessful, but encouraging them for trying, encouraging them for making improvement, encouragement throughout. Second method, and there are many, I'm just selecting a few to talk about, is natural consequences. Because people are responsible, we allow people to fail and to experience the consequences of their actions in an atmosphere of trust and respect. But we allow people to learn, to try, to fail, to experience the consequences, and to try again, allowing the consequences to take place. The push-button technique is a interesting cognitive technique, and the purpose of the push-button technique is to help people see that they do have a choice in how they're feeling, and basically the idea is in the counseling setting, to have the person picture, for example, you might do some imagery, have the person picture themselves in a very relaxing situation, maybe a day at the beach, maybe lying at the beach in the sun, enjoying the sound of the waves and the warmth of the sun, and getting into a very positive sort of mindset where you feel relaxed, where you feel comfortable and capable and optimistic, and you start to feel those feelings when you go through that imagery process. All right, then you can think about the day that you've been having, maybe a rough day, and feeling a lot of anxiety and tension, and focusing on that. All right, and then you can have the person experience the emotions of this bad day that they're having, the anxiety and the tension, depression, and so on. Okay, and so having gone from one set of emotions to the other, by putting your mind in different places, the person learns that they can choose how they are going to feel. They can choose to control their emotions by changing the way they're thinking about things, by changing what they're thinking about. So it's really a cognitive process that allows us to have insight into this connection between thinking and feeling. The last two I wanted to talk about, the first is prescribing the symptom, or the paradoxical technique. And this was a technique also very popular in a lot of current theories, pioneered by Adler. And it's basically having the person do that thing that they are most worried about or most trying to change. So you prescribe the symptom, or you do paradoxical intention. If they are trying to stop being anxious, then you might encourage them to take some time to be anxious. Maybe be anxious for 20 minutes, where you do nothing else but be anxious. All right. you experience the process of the anxiety. You do nothing else but be anxious. You get a good sense of what it is that you want to change, but then you stop after 20 minutes, and then you do something else. And again, sort of a cognitive technique where you learn that you can control these things. By engaging in them and then stopping, you can learn that you have power over change, that you can do and then stop doing these things. They do not have control over you. And then acting as if. Very powerful technique where if you have a person who is describing to you how they would like to be, how they would like to be able to act, and it's different from how they are acting, you encourage them to do it. Try acting as if you were, for example, unafraid and competent. So for a limited time, so like for this week or for Tuesday night, when you go into this class and you have to give a public talk, I want you to play the role of an actor and act as if you were a very skilled public speaker, and act as if you were confident and competent, and again, this is a time-limited thing where you try it and you see how it goes. You come back and you talk about it, what went well, what didn't. But again, it can be a very powerful learning experience, and the point obviously is that you learn that you actually can be that thing that you are trying to be and that you are working toward. So to summarize Adler's theory, rehabilitation counseling really wasn't going on during the period of Adler's life. He didn't actually do a lot of talking specifically about disability and rehabilitation counseling. But nonetheless, a lot of his ideas have certainly translated into modern counseling and rehabilitation counseling. In fact, it's been said that Adler is sort of unique in that so many people used his ideas, and his ideas are really very prevalent in the theories that came after. Especially you'll see them when we talk about REBT, cognitive theory, reality theory, and the humanistic theories, person-centered theory, existentialism. A lot of the things we'll talk about, you will see, you'll hear echoes of Adler's ideas. The idea that it is necessary to see and work with the whole person and to understand the person in the context of his or her environment is certainly a very congruent with the ideas that we call principles in rehabilitation counseling. So very similar perspective on how we should work with people and how we can effectively work with people, very much in line with Adler's perspective. His theory has been applied in a number of rehabilitation counseling research projects. It's been applied in rehabilitation counseling with specific conditions, and more generally with the rehabilitation counseling process. So there is quite a bit of research out there. I wanted to point out that Warren Rule has authored many articles and 2 excellent books on using Adlerian principles and applying Adlerian ideas in the area of adaptation to disability. So if you're looking for further reading along those lines, I recommend you look up Warren Rule, which reminded me something else I wanted to say when we were talking about psychoanalysis and the defense mechanisms. Hanoch Livna recently wrote a couple of excellent articles on denial, the defense mechanism denial. They were published in the Rehab Counseling Bulletin in 2009, and so if you're interested in reading more about denial, Hanoch Livna's recent articles would be very helpful. Livna and Ken Thomas and Siller, Siller, those are some of the names of other people that you might want to read if you are interested in the psychoanalytic approach and how that has been applied in rehabilitation counseling. I think that concludes our discussion of Adler's theory, and we'll stop there.